Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Aquarius History. Last time we were talking about World War One, and we ended with the Balkan regions, but this time we're just gonna step away from that confusing bundle of war and Serbians and kebabs. Our first topic is France and Germany. So last video we discussed that Germany declared war on Russia after Russia mobilized its forces against both Austria and Germany, which the Germans didn't really like, of course. Nevertheless, we also discussed that France and Russia had some sort of alliance going on with one another. So, Germany thought it was the best idea just to go say, hey, we already declared war on Russia, the biggest country in Europe, biggest manpower in Europe. So, the smartest thing to do is go to war with France. Naturally, of course, smart, ingenuitive, best plan in the 19th century. And to go along with it, they of course used the Schlieffen Plan, which was made by one of the field marshals, Mr. Schlieffen. Yeah. Good old Mr. Schlieffen coming up with all the good plans. This is where, Germany tried to do this in World War II and it actually worked. I don't know why they would even try it again, because in World War One it didn't work at all. They tried to do a little sneaky sneak through Belgium, but the people in Belgium, I don't think they appreciated it too much. So they kind of fought back. Britain was like, "Oi, stop that!" And Germany was like, "Nah, fam, we're gonna have to do this. I don't care if you join the war. I'll just beat you back with my beautiful Bismarck navy." Nevertheless, the Schlieffen Plan didn't work out because the Germans were trying to avoid a whole meat grinder event happening down on their eastern border. They didn't want to just slam their armies together. They wanted to do the sneaky sneak. But that failed, so everyone just kind of hopped into a trench. It wasn't pretty. A lot of people died. 10 out of 10 would not recommend again, but I guess it worked out well in World War II. They built a wall, and the Germans were like, let's go around it. Yeah, guys? Yeah. So that's what they did. But the Germans fighting the French, it wasn't pretty. It wasn't pretty at all. But they only did this whole Schlieffen Plan because they wanted to capture Paris before the Russians could actually mobilize their troops. Because it was projected that it would take 6 to 8 weeks for the Russians to mobilize their whole army. And even then, the Russian army wasn't even good. I'm going to stop myself right there. I know that I'm just going to get on a whole tangent about why the Germans easily demolished the Russians back into a whole civil war. But I'm not even going to get into that. I'm not going to get into that. I was supposed to get into it later. I'm not going to get into it right now. Right now, we're going to talk about the British and the Germans and their relations and why Britain decided to go to war against Germany for neutralizing the people in Belgium, the Belgian neutrality. Until the early 1900s, Britain was more concerned about Russia and France than it was Germany. Relations between Germany and Britain were actually very good. This began to change, however, when Kaiser Wilhelm II took control of Germany. He was anxious for Germany to be a great power. He felt that Russia to the east and France to the west were encircling Germany. As a result, he built up his armed forces. France and Russia feared Germany and did the same. During the 1900s, all of the great powers in Europe began to build up their armies and their navies. British policy in Europe intended that no country in Europe should become completely dominant. If Russia, France, Germany, and Austria-Hungary worried about each other, then it would be less of a threat to Britain. It makes sense. Have all of these big European empires be worried about themselves, while you, the small British island over there, completely takes over the majority of the world. I get it. It's smart. By 1907, it was becoming very clear to the British that the greatest potential threat to Britain was going to be Germany. They had a strong economy, large population, and powerful armed forces. They seemed capable to dominate Europe. As a result, the British ended up supporting Russia and France and joined the Triple Entente. Despite being a part of the Triple Entente, Britain was not committed to going to war in 1914. The Foreign Secretary, Sir Edward Grey, spent much of the summer of 1914 furiously trying to reassure Russia and Germany and prevent a war from happening. Even when German troops invaded France and Belgium as part of the Schlieffen Plan, Britain did not have to go to war. Germany hoped Britain would stay out of the war altogether. However, the Germans knew that the British promised to defend Belgium under the Treaty of London in 1839. The Germans wanted the British government to ignore the Treaty of London and let the German army pass through Belgium. The British government made much of their duty to protect Belgium. Belgium's ports were close to the British coast, and the German control of Belgium would have seen a serious threat to Britain. In the end, Britain refused to ignore the events of the 4th of August 1914 when Germany attacked France through Belgium, hence the Schlieffen Plan. Within hours, Britain declared war on Germany, and the Kaiser said how foolish he thought the British were. He said that the British has gone to war for the sake of a scrap of paper. Within a few days, Britain, France, Russia were all officially at war with Germany and Austria-Hungary. What had started as a small problem in the Balkans was turning into the biggest and most brutal war the world has ever seen. Alright, so now we're going to talk about Italy. And before we break out all of the, oh, Italy betrayed Germany memes, we're going to talk about what actually happened. When World War I broke out in the summer of 1914, Italy declared itself neutral in the conflict, despite a membership in the so-called Triple Alliance alongside Germany and Austria-Hungary since 1882. Over the course of the months that followed, Italy and its leaders weighed both their options. Wooed by both sides, they carefully considered how to gain the greatest benefit from the participation in the war. The decision to join on the fray was on the side of the Allies was based largely on the assurances Italy received in the Treaty of London. By its terms, Italy would receive the fulfillment of his national dream, control over the territory on its border with Austria-Hungary, stretching from Trentino through the South Tyrol to Trieste. In addition, the Allies promised the Italians parts of Dalmatia and a number of islands along the Austria-Hungary Adriatic coast. The Albanian port city of Vlorë, or the Italian version, Valona, and the central protectorate in Albania, and the territory from the Ottoman Empire. On May 23, 1915, Italy declared war on Austria-Hungary. The Italian declaration opened up a new front in World War I, stretching 600 kilometers, most of them mountainous, alongside Italy's border with Austria-Hungary. Italy, which had become a unified nation only as recently as 1956, was like Russia, not yet an industrial power. It was certainly not prepared for full-scale warfare. Although it managed to mobilize 1.2 million men in the spring of 1915, it possessed equipment for just 732,000. Upon declaring war, the Italian army immediately advanced into southern Tyrol and straight to the Isano River. The Austrian-Hungarian troops were met with stiff defense. The snowy and treacherous terrain made the region poorly suited for an offensive, and after several quick Italian successes, the combat settled into a stalemate. So, I'm just gonna throw something in, but the Isano River battles are kind of a meme because there's so many of them. My God. It's like, if I have to remember off the top of my head, it's probably like 9. I'm pretty sure it's more than 9 though. The Italians and the Austrians just kept on fighting over the river. I think that's like the most eventful piece of the war. That's all you really need to know. Just the Battle of the Isano River. Just them fighting over and 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 over. Alright, so we're moving on to the Ottoman Empire. What you need to know about the Ottoman Empire is basically it's just Turkey on steroids. That's all you really need to know. So, the Ottoman government, as well as the Allies, did not want the Ottoman Empire to join the war. However, a series of events orchestrated by the Germans with the collusion of Enver Pasha, who was the single most influential and powerful military figure in the country at the time, who believed that an alliance with Germany and the eventual victory would lighten the country's troubles. But in reality, it put the empire on a path of no return. It would take me a long time to really just say all the events that went down because it was a lot of he said, she said. So what you need to know is that the Ottomans and the Germans, they kind of were colluding together, and the Germans had these ships that couldn't leave the Mediterranean, and more specifically the Adriatic Sea. So that guy Enver, he was like, hey, why don't we just pretend that you sold us the ships and then we eventually give the ships back to you? And he didn't really discuss this with the German government, let alone the emperor himself. So they just kind of went along with it, and the Germans were like, whatever, we can do this. I mean, the German naval group, the two boats. So they're basically quote unquote bought, and the Ottomans immediately put them to work. And when I say the Ottomans, I mean Admiral Suchan, who was basically one of the German naval commanders who got put under the wing of the Ottoman Empire and labeled an admiral. Sounds like a cool guy, but his plans were to basically attack Odessa, Sevastopol, Feodosia, and Yalta, as well as Novorossiysk, with 3 separate squadrons. He landed in Fedorovsk and Yalta without any opposition and even warned the civilian population that they would start shelling the area soon, which would later give him time to retreat. He would later admit that he acted the way he did to specifically force the Ottoman Empire into the war as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the Russian army and navy were given strict orders not to fire first against the Ottomans. They wanted to make it clear to the international community that they were the ones being attacked first. After the raids on the Russian cities, a 2-day political crisis followed. The Grand Vizier, which was basically the prime minister, and the cabinet forced Enver Pasha to issue a ceasefire order to Suchan as soon as they found out. Several high-ranking officers, including the Grand Vizier, threatening to resign in protest. 4 of them later did. Enver Pasha informed the Germans that he was going to issue an apology to the Russians and there was nothing he can do. And the apology letter wasn't really clear because the Enver, he wanted to make it seem like the Russians instigated it all, which was clearly false. And then the British got involved per usual, and they took things a little too far. And after they built 2 boats for the Ottoman Empire, they ended up seizing them and immediately conscripting them into the British Navy. So it wasn't too long after that the Ottomans were like, you know what? I guess we're going to war. So that's the Ottoman Empire. I would talk about the Russian Civil War, but all it really is that the Bolsheviks declared revolution on the October government. And then in February, they had the revolution. It was the White Army, which was the government, versus the Red Army, which was the people, the Bolsheviks. We all know how it went. The White Army eventually surrendered. The Red Army was like, we established Soviet Union. And over the next 100 years, or not 100 years, over the next 90 years, there was a lot of starving. And now, there's a lot of memes. Thanks, Russian Civil War. You know, I almost forgot to do my outro. Stay hydrated, guys. Aquarius history out.